at the Smni Presidential Debate 2022. Thank you to everyone who have been staying with us this whole evening. We're down to our last two panelists' questions. And our next question is going to come from the Chairman and CEO of the Manila Times, Mr. Dante Clink-Ang II. Mr. Ang, your question please.
Thank you. I'd like to turn your attention now to education, which I believe is relevant in preparing the country to compete in the future. Mostly, the initiatives in this sector included raising the salaries of teachers. But what is not mentioned in the policy work is that these increases favor only those in the public school system. In fact, the private education system has suffered unintended consequences involving mainly the migration of from the private to the public sector. This is an added strain on the private schools, and it imperils the jobs of hundreds and thousands of teachers, administrators, and other employees. They have been reminding lawmakers and policymakers that the 1987 Constitution recognizes the complementary roles of public and private institutions in the educational system, according to Article 14, Section 4, Subsection 1. My question is, as President, how will you execute the constitutional provision on complementarity in education so that we have a stronger educational system built on a true-to-form public-private partnership?
And the first candidate to answer that question would be Secretary Abella, then we'll have Talyodi, Secretary Gonzales, and Senator Marcos.
I'm familiar with the problem because we run a secondary school, and that's true that many of them just leave. Now, offhand, what do you do? But basically, I think what we could do is if we could provide, for example, certain if government could actually provide private schools with additional benefits and leeways in terms of support, not necessarily direct rollouts, but actually, for example, what do you call it? Holidays, tax rebates along that line. But definitely, it's something that needs to be attended to, and it's something that has to be responded to as soon as possible, and basically, it should be considered as a top priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Abella. Talyodi, same question.
Mas talaga ang dapat gawin ay mas magbigay talaga yung gobyerno ng mas mataas na atensyon dito sa sektor ng edukasyon. At dapat hawag niyang buong-buo na talagang ipinagpapaubaya doon sa private.
Mali na naman yung sagot niya.
Resulta ito ng maraming problema para sa ating mga mag-aaral. Turing natin na importanteng sektor ito na yung edukasyon.
Hindi naman yun eh.
At yung responsibilidad talaga ng gobyerno natin itaas to the maximum na akuin niya.
Hindi yan yung tanong
yung responsibilidad na tiyakin na yung sektor ng edukasyon natin ay nabibigyan ng prioridad at natutugunan yung pangailangan ng tamang curriculum na nakaayon doon sa programa sa pagbangon ng ating ekonomiya. Hindi dapat mahiwalay at itulak yung private na tugunan din para mag-complement para sa kanilang plano.
Secretary Gonzales.
Pinaka-importante ang edukasyon. Lalo na kung nag-aambisyon tayo maging first world. Dapat ibibigay natin sa ating kabataan ang pinakamahusay na edukasyon na makukuha natin sa mundo, yan ay dapat ipatupad ng ating pamahalaan. Ngayon, di isang malungkot na bagay lamang na dapat tayong i-correct. Alam nyo, hati ang lipunan natin sa mayaman at mahirap. Ito ay malinaw na malinaw sa sistema ng edukasyon natin sa Pilipinas. May edukasyon pang mayaman, edukasyon pang mahirap. Sinasabi natin, pag eskwelahan ng mahirap, okay na yan, pang mahirap lamang. Hindi papayagan ng ating pamahalaan ang bagay na yan. There will be a common standard for all. We need our young people to receive the same kind of education whether you are rich or you are poor, which means na i-implement natin yung nasa konstitusyon. Ito bubuhos ng gobyerno, pribado, publiko, ang pagtataas ng antas ng quality ng ating edukasyon na natutugma sa pangangailangan ng ating mga kabataan sa kasalukuyan. Dapat, mabadali na lang kayo yan. Mag-relate tayo sa iba't ibang universidad, sa iba't ibang panig ng daigdig. Dali natin dito ang magagandang edukasyon para sa ating kabataan.
Thank you, Secretary Gonzales.
Hindi pa
Senator
nasagot
Marcos.
yung tanong.
Maganda at napunta ang usapan natin sa larangan ng edukasyon dahil sa aking pananaw ay ang edukasyon ang pinakamahalagang serbisyo na idinudulot ng pamahalaan sa kanyang mamamayan. Kaya't ang dapat nunang gawin ay siyempre yung public school system ang unang dapat titignan. Patitibayin natin at saan natin pagagandahin, paano natin pagagandahin. Unang-una, suportahan natin ang ating mga guro na yung sapat ang kanilang hindi late yung kanilang sahod na dumadating. Unang-una, laging reklamo yan ng mga teacher natin. Pangalawa, lahat ng benepisyo na nasa batas ay maibigay natin sa kanila nang sa ganun, hindi nila kailangang isipin kung paano nila papakainin ang kanilang sariling pamilya at ang iniisip lamang nila kung paano natin at kung paano sila magtuturo para pagandahin ang magiging kinabukasan ng ating mga kabataan. And sa bukod pa doon ay yung mga facilities. Kailangan yung silid-aralan ay paramihin natin yung mga supplies na binibigay natin sa ating mga public school ay paramihin natin, pagandahin natin lahat ng mga materyales na ginagamit at sa ganung paraan ay ang mga teacher natin kailangan natin suportahan hindi lamang sa financial na suporta kung hindi sa pag-aaral, sa pag-refresher course para sila ay talagang tinuturo nila ang pinakabago at ang pinakatama na dapat turuan sa mga bata ngayon.
Thank you, Senator Marcos. I think Secretary Abella has a reaction.
Gusto ko lang po dagdagan, for example, kasi ang pinag-uusapan po natin dito yung support of private schools, right? Kung pwede magbigay ng paluwal ang gobyerno, lalo na sa mga private schools, lalo na pag sila mag-i-specialize sa science, technology, and the sciences and the sciences. So kung pwede po sana natin bigyan silang paluwal, suporta paggawa ng mga laboratory, suporta paggawa ng mga research ng mga teachers, mga guro. And then, meron lang, meron ding kontrata, some sort of covenant, na ano may makuha doon should be shared, no? Should be shared. Basically, should be, dapat na share. For example, research, science, gano'n, dapat na share sa business so that it becomes part of the public treasury of knowledge. So, kumbaga, para yung tinatawag natin na complementarity, ay dapat matutugunan, lalo na by supporting especially those na na talagang pupunta sa science, ini-emphasize nila science.
Thank you, Secretary Abella. Mr. Ang has a follow-up question.
Yes, Secretary. I think one of the existing programs now is the voucher system, given directly to students, allowing them to choose whether they enroll in a public school or private school. The problem, however, is that some say that the voucher system does not go far enough, and even the amounts of the vouchers themselves require public schools to charge a top-up fee just to meet their cost if they are to offer the available programs that they have. So would you, as President, look into that as a possible solution so that there will be competition, a healthy competition between public and private schools on quality and let the students choose?
I would do that. I would do that, especially katulad nung pero tama kayo, yung voucher system, kulang talaga yun, no? Kulang talaga siya. Kung pwede, dagdagan. On the other hand, basta't pwede naman takasan yung pinamimigay, basta't lang yung resulta, no? Magiging resulta should be made publicly available so that magiging kasama sa ating public treasury of knowledge. Yun po.
Yes, may I?
Senator Marcos?
Yes,
Senator Marcos.
sa palagay ko, kaya nga kahit anong voucher system ang gawin natin, magiging laging kulang yan. Kaya sinasabi ko, unahin natin ang ating public school system. Ngayon, paramihin natin ang ibinibigay ng pamahalaan na scholarship para yung mga deserving, yung mga napakasipag at napakatalino at napakatalented ay mabigyan ng pagkakataon na makapunta sa kahit anong eskwela. Hindi lamang din sa Pilipinas, marami tayong scholarship programs na nanggagaling sa iba't ibang ahensya ng gobyerno. At sa ganung paraan din, maaari nating i-encourage. Sabihin natin, kailangan natin ng agronomist. Di gumawa tayo ng nung labas tayo ng marami scholarship fund para sa mga agronomist. Gusto natin na paramihin ng ating engineer. Ganun din. Kaya siguro, yan ang maaari nating magawa para bigyan ng pagkakataon ang nanggaling sa public school na makapag-aral sa mamahalin na private school.
Senator, I'm not sure if you're familiar with a study commissioned by COCOPEA. This is the Coordinating Council of Private Education Associations of the Philippines. They did commission a study around 2020 where the results were the returns on investments by private schools resulted in higher returns than the investments in the private educational system. So in a sense, there's private capital being invested for a public good. And yet, the private school system is saying that they are not given an even playing field. All of these initiatives, although well met, somehow have these unintended consequences that work against the private educational sector's economic interest.
Well, the very nature of a public school as opposed to a private school is different. And as you say, the private capital is being expended to run that private school. And therefore, the decisions on how they run that school depends on the management of that school. Now, the public school is something we have control over. And that is why I think that we should focus our efforts first in the public school system. And the private schools will again find maybe if they need that, if that is what they need additional capital, because it is not only an educational institution, but it is also a business, and therefore they have to make those decisions themselves. Now, if we improve the quality of the teaching in our public schools and the support that we give our teachers, then I think we can even out that playing field that we're talking about.
Any reactions from our candidates?
Follow up.
Okay. Mr. Ang has a follow-up question.
Just the other day, one of our columnists, Father Rani Aquino, came out with a column warning against the measure in the Congress, House Bill 10282, which basically makes the Commission on Higher Education a very domineering institution in an environment where private schools already feel that there's policy overreach and overregulation. They feel that this atmosphere stifles innovation in education, and because they are getting higher returns on their investments, it seems like it would be a wrong move to further empower these education institutions to continue these domineering policy work over the education system. Would you have a comment?
Well, I don't think that is not a systemic problem. That is a policy problem. And that is how we should address it. The system is not at fault here. It is the policy that's being undertaken that causes this dysfunction that Father Rani has been talking about.
Any other reactions from the other candidates with regard to that question?
It is a policy matter, not a structural problem.
Okay, thank you. And now we'll move on to our next question from our panelists.
Can I follow through Dante's question?
Okay, before we leave that topic, sure,
Yeah,
Professor
because-
Carlos.
Yeah, before you call on MJ. Well, I'm an educator and I have been teaching for the past 55 years. You know, I started teaching when I was 20, so I'm 75 now. So education is really so pivotal to my professional life. The empirical evidence suggests to us that effective learning happens on the basis of two factors. First, the mastery of the subject matter by the teacher, and two, a fairly high level of motivation with the student, and they are interacting. Therefore, if you want to do any policy changes, that means you pay attention and you invest on the teacher. Do not invest on air-conditioned rooms, classrooms, etc. Because these things can happen even under the papaya tree. But if the teacher is bobo, no learning happens. So that means if you have limited number of pesos, put it on the training of teachers. Okay, the other part, and I was triggered by the question of Dante here, is yes, a legislation which is going through the legislative mill in regard to empowering the child. Why in heaven's name did we divide our education system into a DepEd, K-12, a CHED, and kung bobo ka, diyan ka na lang sa BOCTEC, ha? No? I remember, ang uncle ko sabi niya dun sa isang bobo kong pinsan, ay nako kasi, mahina naman ulo mo, mag-teacher ka na lang kaya o mag-military. Oh my God! Yung bobo yung gagawing teacher, no? So, education is so pivotal to the life of our nation. So, you as chief executives, I would plead
Dapat
that you pay
talagang
attention to
credible yung mga
empirical
teacher,
evidence.
no?
The
Ngayon,
critical
ang dami sa
variable for
probinsya.
effective learning to happen is to invest on the teacher. Thank you.
Yes.
Is there a question that you want them to address? Or
Well, Karen, I'm really leading to what Dante said. You need an EDCOM too. Kasi yung EDCOM 1 ang nag-ganyan yan nag-divide yan sa tatlo. Why they divided that? I don't know. There's something so brainless about these divisions.
Well, Karen, if I may add,
ba't na yun?
recently referring to another
Na-divide sa
editorial,
tatlo, no?
there's some conflicting studies
Kaya nga.
on the level of interest of learners in sciences and mathematics kung STEM.
Dapat yun ang
And
mga
of course,
teacher
this
na
is
walang
contradicted
alam.
by the DOST study saying otherwise. But the original study by PIDS was saying that the normal approaches, such as giving scholarships,
Background check.
may not be enough to interest young learners into going into STEM. And I was wondering if you have any thoughts on maybe addressing that particular issue.
In particular, we're thinking of developing what we call a National Volunteer Corps, which would be equivalent to the Peace Corps, where we would challenge our young people between ages 18 and 35 to devote actually at least 2 years of their lives before they go full force into whatever they want to do, to volunteer. And what would they do? They would become part of community building, teaching especially students in the rural areas, those who would be in public schools. And they would be emphasizing at least 3 things. Number 1, mastery of reading, writing, and arithmetic, so that they, and if possible, in the mother tongue before they do it in English. I would strongly recommend that public schools and schools should begin with mother tongue and then in English, because that is how they understand the concepts. That's one. All right. Well, the other one is if this National Volunteer Corps could actually help become models of what it really means to become a person with integrity. Thank you.
Tama naman dapat sa mother tongue
and
muna
now we'll go
bago
to our next panelist, MJ Mondehar, to ask the last question for round 3.
Ang mga tanong ko po ay will concern 2 different sectors that needs government attention. First, meron po tayong 12 senior citizens sa buong Pilipinas based on latest data. Kung kayo po maging Pangulo, would you support the passage of the Universal Pension Act for seniors? Ano mga programa po ninyo sa mga senior citizens?
we'll be starting with Calio de Guzman and then moving towards the right to Secretary Gonzales, Senator Marcos, and then Secretary Abella.
Dapat talagang suportahan natin itong mga senior citizens natin. At tingin ko dapat ding payagan natin na yung mga senior citizens ay magpatuloy sa pagtatrabaho sa mga trabahong kailangan nila, na makakatulong sila. Ibig sabihin, dito yung mga mabibigat na trabaho. Nakita ko yan sa South Korea na yung mga senior citizen natin ay nagiging mas masigla yung katawan nila kapag sila ay nakakapag-participate pa doon sa mga trabaho na kaya nilang gawin, tulad lang ng paglilinis doon sa airport, nakikita doon, ay malaking tulong sa kanila na maramdaman na sila ay bahagi pa rin ng lipunan na kanilang ginagalawan. At the same time, dapat magkaroon sila ng mataas na tulong, hindi lamang doon sa kanilang benefits na nakukuha sa SSS o GSIS, kundi dapat sa healthcare nila ay matugunan ng gobyerno dahil halos yung kailang tinatanggap na pensyon ay nauubos lamang doon sa pagdamot. Pero kung sa pinakailang pagkain, kalusugan ay wala na. Kaya tingin ko dapat maglaan ng pondo yung gobyerno para matulungan natin yung ating mga senior citizen. At makagawa ng isang bagay na magiging
Tapos na to.
makakapag-participate pa sila
I miss
doon sa production ng ating lipunan.
Thank you, Calyodi.
Ang tagal eh.
Secretary Gonzales.
Okay na po, sinabi ni Caliotti.
Okay na.
Thank you, Secretary Gonzales.
Wala na siyang sana.
Senator Marcos.
Well, siguro ang pinakauna, bago pa tayo magpapasa ng bagong batas na napakahilig natin gawin, hindi pa natin na-implementa yung batas ngayon sa pagbigay ng benepisyo para sa mga senior citizens, para sa mga retirees. At ngayon pa lang, dahan-dahang natutupad ang nasa batas na ang pagbigay ng ating mga pensyon para sa ating mga senior citizens. Mahalaga ito dahil alalahanin natin na ang mga senior citizens kadalasan ay hindi na nagtatrabaho at meron talaga dahil may edad na, may karamdaman din. Kaya siguro itagdag natin dun sa pension ay yung pagbayad na ng kanilang health insurance. Ang gobyerno na ang magbabayad ng kanilang health insurance para kapag may silang pangangailangan, may karamdaman sila, meron silang ipambayad. Ang isa pang hinaharap na problema ng ating mga senior citizens ay yung age discrimination na sinasabi dahil kahit nais pa nilang bumalik sa trabaho, ay hindi na sila tinatanggap dahil sasabihin, ba't pa natin kukunin yan na hindi natatagal yan, mahina ng katawan yan, hindi na kaya yung trabaho. Kaya dapat yung ganyang klaseng pagpipili ng bata lamang para makapasok sa trabaho, kung kaya namang gawin ng isang nakakatanda, ay bakit we should not discriminate against them and allow them to continue to work.
Thank you, Senator Marcos. Secretary Abella.
Natural supporter talaga ako sa senior supports.
Siyempre, senior ka.
Pero aside from that, I believe meron talagang dapat. Tulad ng, I believe in supporting the young, especially the first 1,000 days. At pangalawa, yung what I would call golden years. Katulad nun, providing with health and then get them continually
Magagaling sila,
involved,
sayang,
especially
no? Wala iba.
community service. Pwede pa sila, pwede pa tumulong yan. And then grant them enough economic support. And then, continue natin pagbigyan ng support para ang kanilang well-being ay maayos. So basically, yes, we continue to get them not only health insurance and stuff, pero kailangan din silang ma-involve sa everyday life ng communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Abella.
Second question.
Okay.
Daw, meron pa.
Para po ito sa mga IPs, kapatid nating IPs. Pabot po ba kayo sa pagsasabatas ng Department of Indigenous Peoples Affairs? Magkaroon po ng boses sa inyong kabinete para po sa mga IP. 18 million population po sila, over 48% of total land area in the Philippines.
Oo, dapat
And what will be
meron.
your legacy sa mga kapatid nating IPs? Thank you, sir.
We'll start with Secretary Gonzales and then move towards the right to Senator Marcos, Secretary Abella, and then Calyodi.
Yung sa karanasan ko po sa peace process, lagi kong nasasabi sa mga ating mga IPs, bakit ba Lagi kayo sumasabit sa negosasyon sa MNLF, sa MILF, sa CPP-NPA. Bakit wala kayong sariling negosasyon para sa inyo? Kung mga taong po na matutuloy ang ating autonomous regions, dapat bigyan natin ng isang autonomous region ang mga IPs. Isa sa Mindanao, isa sa Luzon. Kailangan may sarili silang lugar na pagkakaroon na makikita ang yaman ng kanilang mga kultura, ang kanilang heritage. Yung mga issue nila dapat tinitingnan ng hiwalay sa ibang mga issue ng ibang mga groups na lumalapit sa gobyerno na ng kanilang mga issue. Sa pagganong paraan, magkakaroon talaga ng identity ng ating mga APs. Patutugunan ang mga problema na sa kanila lamang nakikita.
Thank you, Secretary Gonzalez. Senator Marcos.
Siguro ang pinakauna natin gawin para mabigyan naman ng hustisya ang ating ang mga unang Pilipino, ang ating mga IPs, ay kailangan maging maliwanag na maliwanag kung ano ba saan ang kanilang tinatawag na ancestral domain. Kung ano yung lupa nila mula noong unang panahon ay kanila na yan. Kailangan kilalanin ng pamahalaan, kailangan kilalanin ng batas yan. Ngayon, pag may papasok na halimbawa nagiging problema ito sa mga minahan at sinasabi basta pinapaalis na lang yung IP at wala silang hindi kung ang pinakamalaking maibibigay sa kanila ay magtrabaho doon sa mina, dapat palitan natin yung sistema na at kilalanin nga natin silang may-ari ng lupa na yan. At pagka at naging maliwanag kung ano ang ancestral domain ng bawat tribo, ng bawat IP, ay ang gagawin natin, ang trato natin sa kanila, parang pangkaraniwan na mamamayang Pilipino. Kung lupa nila, dapat kung sino man ang papasok na malaking negosyante, hindi naman sila pwede paalisin doon. Meron silang gagawa sila ng joint venture doon sa may-ari ng lupa. At kung ano man ang kinikita doon sa lupa ng ancestral domain ng mga IP, dapat mapunta sa mga IP.
Thank you. Secretary Abella.
Right, I believe no, na yung ganong klaseng usapan is already in existence. At, pero totoo yan, dapat maproteksyonan ang mga lupain, no? the ancestral domains. At not only that, dapat matulungan talaga sila na mag-develop, katulad ng mga, like sa mga lowlanders. On the other hand, dapat meron din silang sapat na para hindi naman magalaw yung kanilang kultura at saka tuloy-tuloy din yung kanilang pagpasa ng kanilang mga traditional knowledge at traditional mga pamaraan para hindi din naman mawala totally ang ating historical heritage ating mga IPs.
And finally, Calyodi.
Okay ako doon sa pinapanukala na magkaroon ng isang ahensya na magkangalaga sa kanila. Pero bago yan, tingin ko dapat magkaroon ng patakaran talaga na pigilan yung mga land grabber na walang inaagaw yung lupa ng ating mga katutubo.
Yung mga nagde-develop ng mga
nagiging dahilan kung bakit yung ating mga katutubo nawawala doon sa kailang sariling lupa o na
Siyempre, nahuli siya.
tinitirahan at naagaw yung kailang matagal
Si Marcos, galing ng sagot
at pati yung kultura nila nawawala dahil sa land grabbing na ginagawa ng mga mayayamang gustong magtayo ng mga korporasyon sa pagtatanim. Ayan ang dapat matigil. At dahil kung hindi, talagang mawawasak at masisira yung kultura, kailang kinagisnan, yung kailang tradisyon, at yung kanyang sariling politika na pinaiiran doon sa kanilang lugar. Kailangan nating tulungan at proteksyonan yung kailang kabuhayan, hindi lang mga yung kabuhayan, kundi yung buong komunidad na kailang pinagyaman sa mahabang panahon. Suportahan ito ng gobyerno.
Thank you, Calyodi. And that ends our round 3. I was looking at our panelists. No more questions. Thank you.
May round 4
That
pa.
ends our round 3. So many questions, and please clap for our candidates for surviving 3 rounds of very difficult questions.
Tapos na. Nagaling
And to everyone watching us around the world. Don't go away. When we return, we'll hear all the candidates' closing statements. We'll be back.
May closing statement pa.
Maharlika Partners, trabaho at negosyo para sa lahat. Ipaglalaban ang kapakanan ng mga katutubo. May tulong at ayuda sa pandemya. Maharlika Partners, kasanayan, kabuhayan at kaunlaran. Number 153 sa balota.
By Maharlika Partners, Unit 10A, second floor ng Land Building at sa corner Mother Ignacia Avenue, South Triangle, Diliman, Quezon City.
Dante Marcoleta po, para sa pantay na batas at tuwid na landas, iisa ang aking hikain. Mayaman ka man o mahirap, walang dayaan, walang lamangan, alisin na natin ang sistema ng palakasan dahil ang tunay na daan sa pagbabago at pagbangon ng lipunan ay disiplina at paggalang sa batas.
Parang tilukay mo.
Yes, no one is above the law.
No one is above the law. Halata eh.
Ang bawat dagot ng buhay ay gagaan kapag may isang senador
No one is above the law.
tumulong sa iyo kasama mo sa hirap man o ginhawa. Noon at hanggang ngayon.
Maraming salamat po, Senator Mitsubiri, sa pagbabay mo sa oras ng aming pangangailangan.
At aalalay sa iyo sa pagsalubog sa bagong bukas.
The most time senator that I know in the Philippine Senate.
Senador Mitsubiri, trabahador nyo sa Senado.
Panahon na upang wakasan ang karahasan, panluloko at pagpapahirap sa mamamayang Pilipino.
Now we will bring peace to the communities, no longer as